Hello and welcome to Azure Skåne and today's meetup with Stefan Schörling about Azure Security. And for this event we enforce a code of conduct which is published on our meetup website, and I assume that you all have read it very carefully. So the agenda for today, it is, as I said, Azure Security, and it's Stefan Schörling, but also a colleague of him will be co-presenting, Martin Blomgren. So we'll start with the intro first, about 10 minutes, and then we'll continue with that presentation. Azure Skåne, we are a user group for people who are interested in Azure. And you're all very welcome regardless of your previous experience. So our user group is for learning as much as possible. It's for networking with people, and least but not most important, to have fun. And we started in 2017, and now we have grown to over 800 members. And this is the crew behind Azure Skåne. It is me, Johan. And I have a background where I've worked with Microsoft technology and data management for about 25 years. And I'm now running my own consultant company. And I've been using Azure since, the really beginning. And Michael?
Yes, my name is Michael, and I've been in IT since 2000 and working primarily with Azure since 2013, soon 10 years. And I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP.
Yeah, and then there's Magnus Mortensson, who's he's a long-time Azure guy. And during this event, you are very welcome to share things in social media. Make sure we are heard, and use this hashtag Azure Skåne. It's very nice if we can, show up on the maps with our events. And then a big thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft, of course, and Foo Café, who are our sponsors, managing the live stream. And when it's not Corona times, then they have been a very good host for us for our physical events. So thank you very much. By attending this event, you can get a kind of award. There's something Microsoft have that's called the Digital Badger Collection, and that is a blockchain like bitcoins. So you can collect these, and you can earn them by doing different things. One thing is by attending events, and this event actually gives you one of these badges. So there's this learning badge. It's now a special edition for the winter. So all you need to do is to scan this QR code, and you need a wallet app that you download for your phone, and you can collect them, and then you can show them to Microsoft on some events, and you should probably be able to get something nice back from them. And this is now time limited, so I think this one is active for 1 day or something. So if you're watching this in the live stream or attending our Teams meeting, then you can use it. But again, it's valid for only like 1 day or so. We have also started a Discord channel for Azure Skåne. And this is a place to stay in touch between our meetings. So this is now a special invite code for you. It is also valid for only a limited time, so don't hesitate. Make sure you sign up to our Discord, and then you can keep discussing these topics and network with people and ask questions around the presentations. Here's a link. And then we want to recommend something called Hack the Climate. And that's some challenges that will take place between 22nd and 26th of March, and some prizes available. So yeah, we really recommend that you check out this website for more information. This is for developers of all backgrounds and skills. It's about innovative contributions for a sustainable world. So with that, let's get started.
All right, thank you, Johan. So just get the slides in order here. Yeah, great to be here. It's I think I was supposed to be here way back, but I unfortunately got sick that time. So happy to be here finally to join in the user group. I really like the work you're doing and kind of embracing the community. So today we're going to focus on Azure Security, and I think that's kind of the key here. And usually we like to have it interactive, and I would encourage you to put in questions in the chat or so we can kind of respond to that. And we'll cover both some dev side and some infra stuff, so it's going to be a mix. So with me today I have my colleague Martin, so you can introduce yourself and then I can go after.
Yeah, so my name is Martin Blomgren, and I've been working in IT and mainly Microsoft technology for the last 15 years or so. Big focus on infrastructure and DevOps and automation, essentially.
Cool, glad to have you. So my name is Stefan Schörling. So you can find us on Twitter here. I've also worked in IT for over 20-something years with infrastructure and kind of a core security focus over the years. So I think I have a fairly broad overview of a lot of things, and Azure has been kind of, Azure and Microsoft 365 has kind of been my home for the last years here. So really happy to be here. So a bit about the agenda. So a brief overview of kind of different elements of security, and then going to go into a bit about misconfigurations we're seeing, some things about governance you'd need to think about. Then we'll have a glance into the Security Center and the Azure Defender, some news around that and how to kind of scale that out. And then we have some Azure Sentinel, and then we have a bit of a summary here. So if there are other areas we're not covering today, and if you have questions around them, feel free. We're happy to pivot and move around a bit, but that's kind of the agenda we have laid out for today's talk. So anything you want to add there, Martin?
Oh, I think that's basically anything, and we encourage you to ask questions.
Okay, this is kind of a challenge we're seeing. A lot of organizations are getting started with Azure. They hand out the Azure subscription, and then what? They kind of scale up with a lot of Azure subscriptions. They don't think about, okay, we have this Azure Active Directory that everything is built upon. So first off, when you are really getting starting into Azure, you need to control the Azure Active Directory and have the right settings and kind of make sure the governance in the Azure AD is correct. We're often seeing lots of global admins, for example, and if you have lots of global admins in general, they can actually grant themselves permissions to all the Azure subscriptions. And there's no really good way of controlling that today. So if you're putting your infrastructure, if you're putting high privilege stuff in the Azure Active Directory, you really need to make sure that your kind of on-prem account delegation model, your tiering model, is actually also reflected in Azure AD, because that kind of reflects back to your model in the Azure subscription. So let's say you put domain controllers or critical infrastructure in Azure, then the global admins and the permissions around that also needs to follow. Another thing is the application admin role, which is a critical role in Azure AD, which you can actually elevate yourself and grant yourself permissions to through different APIs and such. So Azure AD is kind of a core fundamental when we're talking about Azure security. So therefore we have that a bit around there. So it's usually a lot of organizations are missing out that who we are talking to. Then we have a bit about Azure governance, Martin. So
yeah, so when you have the identity in place, you need to make sure that you have control of everything that you actually want to put in Azure, and that's where the governance come into place. We're going to talk a little bit more about governance later, but it will be topics like naming standards, management groups, and all the technologies we can use to have this governance in place. And after that?
Yeah, it's all the tech pieces. There's different technical elements, and we're going to go have a look at some of them today. And if there's any specific ones we're not covering here, we can always get back to that at another session, or if we can fit it in the end with Q&A and such. So cool. So let's get into it. So what are we actually seeing out there happening in people's or customers' different Azure subscriptions? I would say it's a variation, but usually this is kind of the cloud threats or the cloud aspects you need to think about. Cloud configuration is a key one. I mean, you need to have secure configurations. We often see open virtual machines just standing there on the internet. We often see storage accounts. We often see credentials that are in clear text in code that are kind of on open buckets and stuff, or GitHubs, or wherever you've placed it. So it's kind of, you need to reduce your attack exposure. You shouldn't put your SQL server just open to the internet. We often see that there are SQL servers without kind of IP limitations or any kind of control planes. We often have the accounts. We see a lot of account harvesting, SSH servers and stuff just being put out there. And every day there are some kind of incidents we need to handle in some of our customers. We're also seen some of these resources being taken over because they've had a poor Azure AD delegation, and then they take over that, and then they actually use those resources to put placehold other kind of infrastructure they're using within attacks. So I think it's kind of an important piece. What we're not covering today at all is the IoT devices. There's a new recent investment in IoT, which is CyberX, Microsoft bought last year, which is kind of to maintain and protect and detect in your IoT devices. So it's a lot of misconfiguration. So make sure you have your secure configurations, kind of reduce your attack exposures and such. So there's a lot of different angles to this that needs to be covered, and hopefully we can address some of those around it when we go through today on how to make these threats and these issues visible for you.
Yeah, so governance. I think this sentence actually says it all, basically. You need to have mechanisms and processes to maintain control over applications and all your resources in Azure. And we have different kind of things that can help us with that. One thing that is more used today, but not as much as I would like to see, is the use of management groups to be able to put subscriptions in containers, and that way we can apply policies and RBAC on the management group instead of each and every one of the subscriptions. Because if you have a lot of subscriptions, you often miss to set the correct policies or RBAC roles on the subscription level. Naming standards is something that's really important as well, and I know that this is something that can be workshopped weeks and weeks over to set a good naming standard. And the reason for this is because you cannot change name on anything in Azure once it's set, except for subscriptions. So the name should somehow reflect what the resource actually is. And that's quite important, I think. Azure policy is something else we can use to maintain some kind of order and governance. For example, you can limit in a management group or subscription in which region you can deploy resources. You can limit what kind of resources are being deployed. And I know that many teams want to have agile work where the infrastructure team or the ops team shouldn't hinder them. But with the correct set of policies, we can make sure that they don't do anything stupid, at least. So we maintain some kind of control. And of course, role-based access control is really important. Stefan was talking about the identity earlier, and we need to make sure that the least amount of privilege is set where it should be. So we don't have a lot of global admins or owners who can give other people access and so on. Of course, in the hierarchy, the lower down in the hierarchy you come, the more costly you can be with the privilege. And of course, cost management, that's the question that everybody asks every time. Okay, I'm interested in this cloud thing, but how much will it cost? That's one of the biggest fears. So being able to forecast and have a good cost management is something that is really important. And actually today, something that we haven't been thinking about earlier is, I mean, DDoS attacks, everybody knows what they are, and that's not good because the service will be interrupted. But I don't have a good word for this, but with the cloud, you can auto-scale. So if you can auto-scale, then if you get a DDoS attack, perhaps your resources will auto-scale, and they will auto-scale, and they will auto-scale. And suddenly the bill from Microsoft will be really huge. So cost management, forecast, and limitations is really important as well, both for production and developer teams especially.
Yeah, so adding kind of a more narrow security angle on this, I mean, so this is in essence kind of a challenge, because some of my customers, they have up to like over 1,500 different subscriptions. How do you maintain that in a consistent way? How do you make sure you have the same settings? How do you make sure that you have these kind of same configuration baselines? And that's kind of from a security perspective. I need to be able to find what type of data these resources are having. So I need to kind of have a tag to identify, do they hold PII data? Do they hold PCI DSS data? Or what type of data is the machines are being exposed to, or the services that are hosted in this. So some kind of tagging from a security perspective, as a security ops person, can actually quickly see what type of data we're handling in this solution. Is it the prod data? Does it contain PII or whatever it is? So that is kind of, because rapid response is really important when things are happening. So that needs to be put there. Another thing from a policy perspective is, let's say you have extended your corporate network, you have this hybrid network set up, you have your express route, you connect your VNet, and then someone deploys a dual home NIC, or someone has a public IP on that network, and then you punch a hole in it. And then with Azure policy, you want to limit so the deployments cannot happen. So you can't put the public IP in your internal network connector. They need to be in these different zones. So that's why the management groups are good, where you kind of put your corporate data, you put your online data, you put your kind of island mode data in different management groups. You can apply different policies and have the right security within the right place. And this is something we're seeing, that this is usually a total mess. A lot of companies are kind of transitioning and getting into this, but still there's a lot to do in this area. So it's an important key from that. So naming conventions, sure, yeah, we need to find it easily. A naming convention can help us from a security perspective and also automation perspective. If we want to take certain remediations from a security perspective, we can use that based on either naming conventions or tags or whatever we have. So I think that's very important when it comes to these governance pieces.
Yeah.
So this is the heavily debated, the ever-changing names and what do these different things do. So now we everyone know Azure Security Center. Now someone is suddenly putting Azure Defender in the picture, and then we have Azure Sentinel. What do these solutions actually do, and what's the purpose of them? So there was a lot of recent announcements on Ignite, the other week, whenever that was. So Azure Security Center is your kind of core foundation for your posture management. How well are your servers configured? How well are your resources configured? So you can kind of get this visibility, because visibility is key. You need to kind of make it visual for dev teams, infrastructure teams, etc., where they have issues, because the cloud is new to many people, and it's really easy to do misconfigurations. And I think misconfigurations in any cloud is the biggest concern. I know there's this Gartner statement a few years ago that 95% of all cloud errors will be the customer's fault because of misconfigurations and such. Maybe it's kind of a bad day to put that out there with the recent happening on Azure AD yesterday, but it's kind of a key there. And then Azure Defender, what does that, where does that play in the picture, Martin?
Yeah, so Azure Defender is the actual workload protection, where the threat protection is. And that's something that's equally important as with the posture management, because we need to detect and protect against these threats. And if we can do it and actually mitigate the threat there, everything is good, but sometimes it's not. So that's where Azure Sentinel comes into place.
Yeah, so Sentinel is kind of the cloud-based SIEM where you kind of gather from different sources, either on-prem or whatever. But this Azure Security Center, Azure Defender, that actually plays across cloud, on-prem, multi-cloud. So it's not only the Azure stack, or not Azure stack, the Azure kind of infrastructure. So an important thing here, Azure Defender is, it used to be kind of Azure Security Center standard, and then they renamed it Azure Defender. So it was a lot of people are usually, I think they noticed in the portal when they did the change the other week here. But that's kind of the previous Azure Security Standard, moved into Defender and got some additional features. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's dig into the portal instead to have a look through how Azure Security Center looks. But I mean, this is kind of a pivot point where you get in, you see your posture management, and get into that. So if you are, I guess you're all swapping to, so this is the view. Let's dig into the portal. If you swap over to the demo, we can do that. But this is, it's a lot richer, this picture, than our demo environment.
Yeah. So this is what Security Center looks like, Azure Security Center. And as Stefan said before, there used to be a Security Center free and a Security Center standard. The standard is no more and have been moved into Azure Defender instead. So in Security Center, you have this overview where you get your security score and regulatory compliance, if you have set any, of course. And of course, you get a little dashboard of recent alerts from Azure Defender, and if you are using Firewall Manager, you get that as well. So in Security Center, one of the main thing is the posture, security posture. So here we get a lot of recommendations on the configuration, which was something that is extremely important. And if you are using Security Center free, you get a few recommendations regarding Azure as a whole. For example, enable MFA is one thing that you will probably see even though you haven't enabled the old standard or the new Defender version. So here we got a lot of recommendations for both Azure and our resources, both on-premise and in the cloud, and I would say any cloud. And if we move along, here we can see security alerts which comes from Azure Defender. So as you can see, I do have a few security alerts here, some pretty serious ones. And if I click this, I can do some kind of a investigation where I can see what is actually happening. And I can see which files are being affected, and I can see which hosts and what kind of malware in this case is being used. And as you can see, this is actually a virtual machine which lives in the cloud. I do have some other cloud resources here as well, a app service and storage account and key vaults. So all the kind of resources that you can protect and detect with Azure Defender, you will get security alerts, if any. And we also have a on-premise resource as well on the list.
So in this view, I mean, this is usually the security operations team going in and working. It's not the dev teams, it's not the infrastructure. This is the security department that is usually one to go in there. And that's why kind of we fall back to the governance piece. Often we come out to customers and they say, okay, I can't do any investigation. I can just see the details here, but I actually can't get in and view the resources and the subscription. So that's part of the governance. You need to make sure that your security teams have read-only, so they can actually read and see what's in the subscriptions when they want to do further investigation. And that's kind of an important, every month at least we meet the customer where the provisioning of new subscription doesn't work. You don't have an RBAC flow to add the right people to be able to do this security investigative action. So I think it ties back to that we actually need to have a view at that.
Yeah. And of course, you have the complete inventory of, in this case, my subscription, which you can see up here. And I can see if my resources are protected by Azure Defender or not. And I can see the vulnerability assessment over here. There's actually a small bug at the moment. So my on-premise servers are protected by Azure Defender, but it's not showing either on or off. But in this case, these two resources are protected by Azure Defender. And of course, you can use workbooks. It's something that Microsoft really likes, and I do as well, but I don't have that many workbooks in this demo environment. It's a way to visualize and build interactive dashboards, essentially, based from the data that is gathered. And we do have our security score, and we can go down and see why my security score is so low. And this comes from the recommendations that we looked at earlier. So we can see what do I need to do to get a better security score. And I would urge everyone to actually go through each and every one of these recommendations to see if this is something that can be done. Of course, in some cases, you do have security recommendations that will break your application, so you cannot apply it immediately, but probably there's something you can do within your application to be able to apply this.
And the good thing here is kind of if you have a lot of subscriptions, different dev teams, it's kind of hard. They only see what they have access to, which is of course good. But if you want to do this into a game and do more gamification, then you should kind of take this data with the API. You could build your own cloud portal and kind of add this. So this is the dev team that has the most secure environment. So then you kind of drive the security posture with the dev teams, because no one want to be the top 5 or the 5 worst dev teams who are not considering security in their environment. So it's kind of a way of driving the security posture that you actually gamify the whole kind of posture and configuration management. So I think that's a way to do it from an operational perspective.
Make security fun again, or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the regulatory compliance, and depending on if you do have some regulatory compliance, you can enable so you assess against that. And there are a lot of different ones to to enable, and you will get assessment based on those.
I think the NIST one is kind of a one that a lot of customers are using and applying. That gives you a good foundation on the cloud posture management to at least have a baseline instead of, we've seen organizations trying to build their own cloud baseline. This is how it should configured. They often tend to fall back to the NIST because it's being maintained, so they don't have to maintain that much themselves. And then they actually take the NIST foundation and apply it on a multi-cloud level. So it's not only Azure, because, yeah, believe it or not, customers have other clouds as well, GCP and AWS and whatever they have. And then they kind of try to keep to an industry baseline instead of trying to make your own. It kind of helps you be more long-term in that work.
Yeah. So I think we should jump back to the slides for a little while.
Yeah. And don't hesitate to put in questions if you have any. So.
Yeah. Okay. So we skipped over the part in the demo where we could see the actual Azure Defender, because I thought it would be great to get a little bit of an overview on what kind of resources we actually can protect and get some kind of vulnerability assessment on. And these are mainly the different resource types which we currently can use, and be aware that DNS and Resource Manager are currently in preview, but I think they will go into general availability soon. So for the first one in the previous slide, the virtual machine ones, we do have an option here. And it's actually to onboard on-premise servers and on-premise SQL instances. And the way to do that today, in some resources, it is actually mandatory. For example, SQL servers and Server 2019, which is in public preview at the moment, if I remember correctly. So to be able to onboard those to Azure Defender, we need to use Azure Arc. For all the servers, we can go with the Microsoft Monitoring Agent only, or the Log Analytics Agent.
And to be clear here, it's kind of a Microsoft statement on-premise, but this is really multi-cloud. So if you have IaaS services in other clouds, you can definitely manage them through the Arc as well. And it's kind of, yeah, it's usually think you have everything on-prem or you do Azure, but this is also working in multi-cloud. So if you have GCP VMs, if you have AWS VMs or whatever, it can definitely be applied on those workloads as well. So,
yeah, that's correct. So I was thinking on how can we actually onboard a on-premise or other cloud server to Azure Arc. It's actually quite easy, and it's no cost related to it when it comes to servers, at least. So in the Azure portal, you do have Azure Arc and you have the servers. And as you can see, I have a lot of servers onboarded already, and it's just as easy to press the add button. And here I get a choice if I do want to add a single server or if I want to add multiple servers. For the multiple service choice, the difference here is that we will use a service principal with essentially hard-coded credentials, so we can deploy these to a lot of servers. But for my case, I will just use the add single server one. And I will get the usual Azure portal guide here, where I need to specify in which subscription and in which resource group do I want to put this Azure Arc server, and of course in which region. And the reason they are asking for the operating system here is because the script is of course different if you are onboarding a Linux server instead of a Windows server. And if you need to use a proxy server, you can put that in as well. tagging, something that Stefan talked about earlier, could be important to maintain some kind of control. In my case, I don't have any control at the moment, so I will skip this one. And as you can see here, we will get a script which essentially will download the agent that we need to install on the server, and it will install it. So let's go ahead. And I think it's this one. So here I have pasted the script on a server, and I will just run the script. And the agent will be downloaded, and the agent will be installed. And as you hopefully can see, it will run the command to actually onboard it to Azure, to my resource group, to my tenant, and to my subscription. And as we don't have any pre-set credentials here, we will use the device login once. So here it will tell me to go to microsoft.com/device login and enter the code. And to have some kind of security here, I will do it in another window. So CPV.
So in this case, we get the device-based login from Azure to provide the credentials here, or the device code. So this kind of gives you the ability to add the machines in, you get them onboarded. So that's kind of the road ahead here, and that's kind of goes if it's on-prem or multi-cloud, as I said. And I think we have a question here about, while you're doing that, Martin, about common security features customers are requesting. I think a lot of the customers I'm meeting is that they have not gone into details here yet. They are just getting started. They just need to understand the situation they are in. So there's not too many common requests here. I think there's kind of a challenge around the pricing. Okay, what does this cost? How much do this cost? I just want to turn it on for a few machines. Okay, actually turn it on for the whole subscription. So I think that's kind of the most common ask I get. So we can kind of granularly more control it on what resources we're actually turning this on to. So I think that's kind of the most common ask we have, just configuration wise, but not feature wise. I think people are just getting a grasp at this.
Yeah, and actually there are ways if you do a little bit of research before and see how you set up your networking in Azure, if you do use the hub and spoke model, and if you are using subnetting and perhaps using one subscription per system and so on, then you could enable, for example, all features for one subscription which contains a high value asset system or something like that. So you could be rather smart about it as well. Okay, so my virtual machine, which lives on my computer, is now onboarded. And it's actually just putting the URL to the Azure Arc pane here. So back to the portal, as we have already done this, we can press the close button and we can go back to Azure Arc, and hopefully we will have a demo VM1 in here if we do refresh. And yes, we do have it here. So this is actually the first step in the onboarding part, where we can see our virtual machine, we can see the operation system, and it will do a light inventory to just help us here to get some numbers up and running. And for the second part, if we do want to onboard this on-premise virtual machine to Azure Defender and Azure Security Center, we can do so from in here, for example, or sorry, here. extensions, because one of the requirements here is the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, Log Analytics Agent, SCOM Agent, or yeah, it have a lot of different names these days, so it's hard to keep up. Did I say Azure Monitor Agent as well? So to be able to onboard this, we will add a Log Analytics Agent extension on my Azure Arc machine. Notice I'm doing this from the Azure portal, even though the actual virtual machine is on-premise. And when I create this, it will actually ask for a workspace ID and a workspace key. That's because Azure Security Center gathers all the data into a Log Analytics workspace. So we need to have that to be able to onboard the machine like that. And I can review and create. And this will essentially install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent on my virtual machine. And some of you guys maybe are wondering, what if I do use Operations Manager today for monitoring my server? This will update your current agent on your server to the latest version, but it will retain the configuration. The only time things will break if you are still using Operations Manager 2012 or 2012 R2, but hopefully none of you guys are doing that, so it shouldn't be a problem. And if you are using multi-workspace, it will work as well. So I don't think we will wait for this one, but we will jump back to Security Center. Not this Security Center, but this Security Center. So we're still leaving Azure Defender out of things a little bit. So if I do go to pricing and settings, this is where I will enable Azure Defender on either a subscription level. And when we're talking about the subscription level, we're talking about all the resources that are in Azure. So when it says servers here, it means servers in Azure. When it says Azure SQL database, it means. And actually, from yesterday, I think there's a little bit of a change here, because now it actually says SQL servers on machines as well, but it cannot find one. So, and I do have one onboarded, so it's something in going on here where they might include Azure Arc service here as well. So this is for cloud workloads. And if we go back one step, you can see here that I have actually two Log Analytics workspace, and this one is named so I know what it will be used for. And if I click on this one, it will onboard all the servers and SQL service on machines which are connected to this Log Analytics workspace. And this is something that actually we did just a few minutes ago. And when that is happening in the background, as always, things take some time, so I don't think we will be able to see it all the way through with the machine that we onboarded to Azure Arc and to Security Center or Azure Defender. But when it's done, it will actually install the Azure Defender agents that needs to be there. So I think we're going back to the slides for a moment here.
Sure. Yeah, so Azure Defender for servers is kind of the EDR product. That is, if you are purchasing like Defender for, we'll get into it in the next slide, I think. So
yeah,
I should brace myself. So
yeah, you can take this one if you want to.
Yeah, I will. I'm the VM guy, so
yeah.
So what it does, it's actually integrating with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So this is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for servers, and that can be kind of license-wise. It can be purchased in two ways. Either you onboard through Azure Security Center here or the Azure Defender, or you buy a standalone license of Azure Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for servers. So there's two ways of kind of procuring the license, and this is one way of getting it. So with this integration, it's actually going to light up the agent, it's going to turn it on, and then you can actually look on the security posture and the kind of everything's happening on the server in the security.microsoft.com portal to kind of get the visibility on these VMs. And that has a kind of an advanced threat detection, finding everything that is in kind of configuration wise, everything happening. So it's kind of a flight recorder of the VMs, what's actually happening. And then we have threat detection, which is through the Security Center portal. And then we have an add-on here as well, which is available, which is the vulnerability assessment, which is kind of duplicating a bit, but it's Microsoft has that in the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, so that also assesses VMs from a threat and vulnerability management. And then there's an actual extra value. You actually get the Qualys vulnerability assessment as well, which itself is available in the Security Center portal, where the TVM from Microsoft is available in the security.microsoft.com portal. So it's a bit of a mess if you're kind of an Azure person, and then suddenly you have to go into a new portal, security.microsoft.com, and it could be that you don't have access to it. And with this, we also get the just-in-time VM access. As we said, we see a lot of VMs being exposed directly to the internet, and brute force attacks are going on, and even if you change the port, it's just going to find it and attack it. You wanted to say something, Martin, there to add on?
Yeah, so the just-in-time VM access is of course only for VMs running in Azure and not in any other cloud or on-premise.
Yes, good point.
Yeah.
And then we have adaptive application control, which is kind of controlling. It's kind of only allowing applications you allow to run on the VM. So if you have a limited use case, you have just certain processes running, it will actually block all the other processes from running on the VM until you approve them. So it gives you this insight what they're actually running, and you have this easy way of allowing what to be run. And then we have FIM, or File Integrity Monitoring, which is kind of a common practice in many regulated environments for PCI DSS, etc. You could run Tripwire or whatever, but FIM is kind of Microsoft's way in Azure to give you file integrity monitoring to detect changes to important files in the operating system. So you kind of get detection on that, so you can in some way get a tick in the box for your regulatory compliance. It's usually highly strict regulated environments to have file integrity monitoring. So
yeah. So if we go on, you have Azure Defender for SQL as well, and it's both Azure SQL and on-premise SQL. With Azure Defender in general, you get the advanced threat protection and you get the vulnerability assessment. So in this case, threat protection could be detecting SQL injections or brute force, or in the worst case, some kind of data exfiltration. And if you do go through the vulnerability assessment and all the recommends that you have, you hopefully will not have any of the threats that you are protected against. But in some way, I mean, it could be bad code as well in the for example, web application. So you could have SQL injections anyway. And of course, it's for SQL Service Anywhere with Azure Arc. So it's a requirement to use Azure Arc if you onboard SQL Service in any other cloud or on-premise. If we go on, you have the same for the app service with the threat detection, vulnerability scanners, and Microsoft do know a lot of the known malicious IP addresses. And one really cool thing that I actually want to highlight here is the dangling DNS entries. So if you have ever spun up an app service in Azure, you know that you will get a DNS name, which is appname.azurewebsites.net. And most of the time you do use a custom DNS name. So for example, myapp.mycompany.com. But what happens if you delete the app service, the web app, but forget to delete the DNS record? That's where the dangling DNS entry comes in, where actually Azure Security Center will alert you that you do have a DNS entry which points to an app service which doesn't exist. And if it don't exist, anyone in the world could register an app service with that name and use your domain for their website. And this works with any DNS provider, so it's not a requirement to use Azure DNS. And of course, you get vulnerability assessment. For example, the easy ones is only allow traffic over HTTPS or something like that. And something that I think is important in general when it comes to Azure, managed identities are becoming available essentially everywhere. So instead of hard-coded credentials, use managed identities where you give the app service an identity and give the app service, for example, access to a key vault where the connection string lives or something like that. Storage accounts. It's the same here. It will protect and look through all your blob containers, file shares, and data lakes and whatnot, and it will detect a lot of malware uploads, suspicious IP addresses, or if you have some kind of, unusual access or data extraction, it will alert you. And the same thing again, if you do go through the recommendations from the vulnerability assessment, you will be protected from some of these. And perhaps someone thinks this, we do have a checklist. We don't need the vulnerability assessment, but in the rate that the cloud moves, you will always be one step behind. So the vulnerability assessment is something that's going on and on and on. So they're really great to have. And for key vaults, this is where we have our most precious things, our certificates, secrets, and so on. So this is something that we really need to have some protection on. And it will some kind of unusual behavior against the key vault. Essentially, it will alert you. Of course, there could be some false positives, but I rather get a false positive than not knowing that my credentials are stolen. And same thing again, the vulnerability assessments. That's something that is really valuable. When it comes to Kubernetes, it's the same here. You get threat protection, and as with everything else, from malicious IP addresses and API requests from suspicious IPs, exposed dashboards, and so on, this will generate security alerts in the Azure Security Center, and you get recommendations as well. And when it comes to container registers, where we perhaps have some of the containers which you are using with Kubernetes, those are actually being scanned. So it's looking for vulnerabilities within your images. So you don't spin up a new container from one of these images. And DNS, something that is in preview. So the possibility for threat detection. If you see communication with the command and control servers, you see phishing activity, traffic from dark web, DNS tunneling or DNS cache poisoning, that's something that will trigger an alert, and you will get threat detection from. So it will not only in all cases just trigger a security alert, it will also mitigate it as well. And lastly but not last, Azure Resource Manager. This is where where we connect to when we're using the portal, REST API, PowerShell, Azure CLI, or Terraform, or whatever we're using to talking to Azure. So it will look for suspicious operations from suspicious IP addresses. I mean, it could be deployments or someone using the REST API from a known botnet or malicious IP. This is something that you will be protected against. Yeah. So going back to the portal. This is actually what we're seeing here in Azure Defender is an overview of all my resources and how well I am protected or covered by Azure Defender. And as you can see, I'm all protected because I enabled this on my subscription. So all my cloud resources are protected, and I also enabled it for my on-premise servers and SQL servers. So everything is protected. But you can see down here, we have some advanced protection, something that Stefan talked about earlier. We have just-in-time VM access. We have, so if we haven't configured this, we will see this here, and we will also see it in the security recommendations as well. So, but this is just a dashboard. And you can also see some insights and the most attacked resources. This is actually one virtual machine which I spun up yesterday, I think, and just left it wide open with a public IP address and RDP wide open. So it didn't take many hours before it was hacked. So of course it's working. I get the security alerts, and some of the things were mitigated as well or protected against, but it's still being notified here.
Yeah, so if I want to build something out of this, Martin, if I need to pull something from the API, let's say I want to build a dashboard with the alerting or a way to visualize these things outside of the Azure portal, what do I have to work with there? So.
Yeah, so I mean, for an ops perspective or an automation perspective, you will often use PowerShell. And when you use PowerShell, there's a lot of good PowerShell modules for this. In this case, if you don't have the complete AZ PowerShell module, it's az.security, which you can use to interact with the Azure Security Center. Of course, you need to connect to Azure AD. That's something that I already done, and you need to set the correct context to the correct subscription in this case. So with an easy commandlet, I can actually get all my security alerts. If I run this one, it's just saying that there will be a breaking change in the new version here. And I can display all my security alerts here. You can see this is the same ones that we were seeing in the portal. So this is, I mean, it's a one-liner to actually get all my security alerts. And if we look at one single alert, we can see all the information that is being given back to us here. So we get a lot of information from this alert, the whole alert essentially. And the same way, we can also update. For example, if we build something that in the other end we are actually, it could be a ticketing system or something, and we want to, for example, close on a security alert. We can do that as well. It's just one line of PowerShell. But of course, all the features of Azure Security Center and Azure Defender is available, so we can get all the security assessment as well here. So here's just a few of them, and I haven't taken the time to build in. You can see there's a lot of duplicates here because I haven't shown you the column with all the resources. So I mean, this is for multiple resources. And you can see here if it's healthy, unhealthy, and that means have I gone through the recommendation and applied the recommendation? If it's unhealthy, I have not. So this is something that we could actually use. But I know that not all of you guys are or not all applications are able to use PowerShell. That's why they do have a REST API as well. And all of their PowerShell modules are actually based on the REST API. So if you want to be one step ahead, you can use the REST API instead. But for the sake of things, I'm actually using PowerShell here, but I am using it against the REST API. So firstly, I need to get a access token to be able to talk to the API, and here I have a REST method which invoke this one, and it's essentially this endpoint, which is Microsoft.security, and I am retrieving all alerts. So let's do that. And now I have all alerts within this variable here. So we can actually look at one of the alerts here. We'll look at one of them. The first one, for example. You can see here that we get one of the alerts as well. The format is a bit different, but all the information is here, as we saw with the PowerShell. And to be able to do something fun out of this, I'm just taking the properties which I need here, and I select those, and I put them out in a file in inetpub directory, so in the IIS web directory. If I do like this, it will generate a JSON file here and put it in my www route in the IIS directory. And for the sake of things, I just built a really easy web page which retrieves the JSON file and just outputs it in a table. So let's see how that looks. Okay, I will refresh the site here. You can see it's on the local host on the IIS, and if I press the load button, the JSON file will be loaded with all the alerts. This could be security recommendations. This could be interactive, where you could, for example, have a button here which says that this has been taken care of and writes back to Azure Security Center that this recommendation is now being handled. That's not something that you need to do, though, because all the recommendations will be evaluated continuously. So until you actually have fixed it, it will still be recommended. But for alerts, as we can see here, you could most possibly have a button which does it for you.
Yes, if you want to build an integration with your current ticketing system or something, you can build with Azure Function or some automation and just taking the alerts, putting in your ticketing system, so you can kind of get one way of looking at it. Because if you don't have this heavy, expensive SOAR tool, or if you haven't get started with Azure Sentinel, it's kind of an easy integration way with this with the APIs. So
yeah, and talking about that,
putting in this connection. So Azure Sentinel is the cloud-born SIEM solution from Microsoft. So it's kind of log analytics with a solution on top of it, which is Azure Sentinel. And then what we're seeing here a lot now is a lot of customers are their on-prem SIEM solutions. They're having a hard time to keep track of all the connectors they need to have, how to connect all the workloads, all the alerting, everything that is changing in this cloud schema and stuff when it comes to these log files they want to get. So then they usually get started with Azure Sentinel too, because they want to be able to keep up with pace. And so we see a lot of adoption on Sentinel at the moment. So with Sentinel, we can actually directly integrate and get the alerts from the Azure Security Center. You can also connect it to Microsoft 365, Azure AD, our on-prem stuff. So it's detecting and not detecting, it's gathering all the data, and then we can apply rules that is actually adding the detection and kind of analyzing the data. Can scroll to the next slide. So it comes with a set of pre-built connectors. It also has, you can add custom connectors, you can add threat intelligence to it. There's a lot of APIs available to it. So yeah, we can move forward on this one. So what it gives you the visibility, it does the analytics, you have machine learning rules that are being applied, you can add your own rules, you can do threat hunting in it, and you have a kind of a simplified incident view, and you can also do automation. And automation is based on logic apps, so we can kind of do some kind of automation like a traditional SOAR, but this is kind of combined together, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful because, I mean, logic app is apps is really easy to start with, and they have a lot of connectors to basically everything within the Microsoft world and even outside the Microsoft world. So you can do basically everything. And if you think that all this GUI stuff is too hard for you and you like to dig down in code instead, just do a generic logic app, which will, start a Azure function or something else, which actually starts the code that you perhaps are more familiar with. Or
yeah, Sentinel itself is kind of a big topic. We just wanted to grasp on it today. I'm sure we can come back and have a dedicated Sentinel session later on, but today we're just giving you, this is kind of the tool you have to play with. So how do we, this is kind of how it looks. You get the incident view, you have a bunch of different things there on the left side. Hunting, dashboarding, if you want to build dashboards on data flows, and automation and stuff. So we can come back to that. But how do I put everything in together in one piece? How do I kind of build everything together? I have all these different components. I think we have the next slide here, which is kind of trying to explain it. And so to the left, we have Azure Security Center, and with that comes the Azure Defender. So that handles both the on-premises and the cloud VMs and SQL and everything that is covered. That we can connect to Azure Sentinel, and which is kind of where we're working in. Same thing below, we have the Azure Defender. We can take everything which is Azure Defender and then we can actually connect Microsoft 365 Defender to Sentinel. Then we have everything that is on-prem on the right side, which we can also connect to Azure Sentinel. So we get this top view of everything. So Sentinel is kind of the top in your architecture when it comes to security operations or managed detection and response or whatever you want to call it nowadays. So I think this is kind of the architecture picture. We don't have everything here, but it's just to give you an idea where they play in the picture.
Yeah.
So how to become successful with security in the cloud? One of the key things is visibility. If we have a lot of scattered dev teams, we need to get visibility for the dev teams, and we also need to have the right accountability model. Someone needs to be responsible for fixing this, and we need to have a management commitment. This is the cloud baseline we're setting. We're not allowed to do this and that. So because we see a lot of organizations coming from the on-prem where they have a strict control, they have a good governance already, they have these architecture boards, and then they suddenly move out to the cloud where everything should be speedy and rapid, and then they forget everything that is kind of core, that you actually need to think about security, you need to think about architecture and stuff. And that's why we see a lot of customers where the cloud infrastructure or the cloud stuff is a total mess. And a way to kind of address this is just to give the visibility, to show the visibility, start with the gamification and kind of make it visible for all the devs who should be responsible for implementing the security. And then security is more kind of providing this is our blueprint, this is kind of the minimum bar, and then it's up to the dev teams to manage, because it usually doesn't go through this change cycle and everything like that, but there needs to be this support to the dev teams to kind of bring them up. Anything else you want to add here, Martin? So.
No, I think you're spot on, and as you said, we see a lot of people who, cloud is easy and cloud is hard. It's easy to just start deploy a new virtual machine. It's just a simple guide. You can press next, and some of the things are pre-filled for you. And that's actually what I did with that virtual machine, and I got a public IP address and RDP. And it was hacked within hours. It's easy, but it's also dangerous, because it's too easy to do things, and you forget about all the things that you actually already know about, because that hasn't changed from on-premise. What have changed is that we do have a lot of new tools today. Azure policy, I would, for those of you who do work in on-premise world and have used a lot of group policy in the on-premise world, I often refer Azure policy as a group policy for infrastructure. Being able to restrict what kind of virtual machine you're allowed to deploy, or if you're allowed to deploy a public IP. That's not something that you can do on premise, but you can in the cloud. So do it, because you can it. So.
And unfortunately, as we work with incident response as well, when customers do get breached, it's not uncommon that it's through an hybrid connection that they've spun up something in Azure, and then someone spun up a test VM, and that VM suddenly stands on the internet. And then from that Azure network, they have full connection to on-prem, and then they found something that is vulnerable, an old operating system that's not being patched, or something simple. They just need to find one thing, and then they go into the environment. We've even had SQL servers being published from IS out to the internet on 1433, and then they're not patched, and then suddenly the company gets breached, and they have adversaries in the environment. So it's really important that this is done right. And another thing we are seeing here is companies are moving as well, because there's a lot of developers who are kind of developing from what dev stations. We've seen with the SolarWinds attack, and we have this everything which comes with supply chain. We need to secure the whole chain. We need to make sure the developers' workstations are secure. Are they working from their home PC? Are they working from a secure VDI? Or are they kind of taking the dev cycle going forward? And we're seeing more and more companies putting requirements on when they buy development projects. They need to fulfill these security things to kind of, as we are securing more and more, we're finding other threats or other gaps in like supply chain and doing attacks that way. So, and this comes back to everything. So yeah. I think that we have a summary slide as well. Otherwise, I think we have presented what we wanted to address and bring up today. So if you can enable it, please enable it. It gives you good insights, and don't enable it just to enable it. You actually need to work with it and look at it as well, and make sure you protect and monitor. And so hopefully it's giving you some ideas what you can do, how you can bring your security to the next thing, and also maybe why it's important to think about security. So with that, I think we are saying thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter or in the chat.
So thank you very much for a great presentation, really. And maybe we can have you back again later to have some more in-depth presentation about Azure Security. At least I would really look forward to that.
Definitely, we can dig into something, and hopefully we can meet up when this pandemic is over. So
yes, yeah, I'm really missing these physical meetups that we have been running. Definitely. So we're looking forward to that. Absolutely. So with that, I would say if you haven't already, then you should really join our meetup. Here's the link, meetup.com/Azure Skåne. And then definitely you should join our Discord, which is, kind of internal forum where you can ask questions and stay in touch with other members of Azure Skåne. And then we have our YouTube channel here. And finally, let's make sure we are heard on social media. So if you like this, feel free to, share about it on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and use this hashtag. And with that, I say thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and see you later at our next upcoming event, which will probably be around May. Thanks.